All right, should kick in, say we're recording here soon. There we go. All right, well, thanks everyone for joining us. We have a pretty big one this month. Scott Hunter, I think you doubled the number of members for this meetup. So thank you for that with this talk. So yeah, let's kind of move things along and we'll jump into this. All right, so this is a good morning, good afternoon, and a good evening to everyone out there, since this is a global meetup, and a good night. I understand that many attendees can't really be here for this. We do record the meetup, and we post it on the nopCommerce YouTube channel really within a matter of a day or two. So definitely watch for that. I also post to this meetup a link to that YouTube video as well. So the agenda for today, I'm just going to cover a few things here. And I'm actually going to give a lightning talk for a .NET developer overview of nopCommerce. This is something that actually I give at different .NET meetups. But we had so many new attendees, and it was hard to gauge whether people were new to nopCommerce, whatnot. And Scott, I was kind of thinking of you, meaning it'd probably be good to hear a quick little overview of what nopCommerce is at a technical perspective. That way you got a sense of what questions might be asked. But of course, don't change your talk. We want to hear everything you got to say. But yeah, I was thinking of you, Scott, when it comes to sneaking in this overview. All right, so the global meetup, this is really for developers and store owners. We try to mix it up with technical and non-technical content. We do encourage sponsors as well. We do meet the third Tuesday of every month, and we've been very consistent on that since we started back in June. We do have a good handful of scheduled meetups coming. Next month is going to be a really good one, meaning Ken Mathis from stores.com, they probably are the largest nopCommerce installation. So if you want to hear a lot of insight on what it is to be a plugin developer from one of the largest nopCommerce installations, that's a great one to attend. Then in April, we're going to have Jeffrey Palermo talk about the Blazor architecture patterns. A lot of us know that nopCommerce is in kind of a, not sure where they're going to go on the front end right now. It's mostly just jQuery, but they haven't really adopted a particular architecture. So this is probably just to give people a background of what's possible within the Blazor architecture. May and July are currently open, and June will be, I thought it'd be good to schedule something on Azure DevOps as well with Jeffrey Palermo. So these all the past meetups are out on the nopCommerce YouTube channel. Feel free to check them out there. And again, this will be posted here, or this meetup will be posted here a couple days after. And yes, if you're interested in giving a talk around 60 minutes or a lightning talk, we try to follow this pattern of a lightning talk and a main talk. And whether your talk is technical or non-technical in the e-commerce space, feel free to reach out. If you're interested in sponsoring, feel free to reach out as well. Again, that's john@nopacademy.com to get that info or to get on the agenda. All right, so I'm going to kill this presentation. And let's jump right into the .NET developer overview for nopCommerce. So again, this is almost like giving a .NET overview at a .NET meetup in some ways. So I know there's a lot of people that are already out there very familiar with nopCommerce, but I have a feeling there's a good handful that are out there that are not that familiar in the technical aspects of nopCommerce. So let's go ahead and jump right into this, and then we'll go into Scott's talk. So we're going to see what is nopCommerce. We're going to take a peek at what the code base looks like, and I'll even kind of touch on what I think the real value of open source is when it comes to a solution such as this. So what is nopCommerce? It's really a little more than your basic shopping cart, but out of the box when you install it with some sample data with inside, you have a pretty clean experience with the inbox theme. And also it is a responsive site. So whether it is the storefront or the administrator, the experience of working with nopCommerce is very clean and as well as responsive, even on the admin side where you got to manage many different items. So nopCommerce, I guess it's come up around a little over 12 years since they first released. And a couple of years after they came out, they had about 5,000 active sites. And in 2011, that's when they released their 2.0 version and switched from web forms to MVC. And In 2013, that's where they released their 3.0 with a lot of different features, including multi-store and multi-vendor support. And in 2017, that's where the big move, the version 4 was put into place. It's where they moved to ASP.NET Core. And this is based on their About Us page. Within September 2019, they had 60,000 active sites using nopCommerce worldwide. So what I really like about this architecture, does continue to evolve, and it evolves in actually a pretty clean way of not bleeding edge, but kind of like at a sensible way for a architecture in this stack. So the different features on nopCommerce, you can check out their site for that. So it is a more this shopping cart. There's also blogging built into it as well. And there's higher end aspects of multi-store management. There's some aspects of dealing with SEO out of the box. It's just a lot of detailed features within inside the solution. So the architecture itself, it's kind of that splash of what a .NET developer kind of looks like when it comes to architecture. This might be kind of hard to read it in this way, so let's kind of put this into some better kind of swim lanes to kind of get a sense of what makes up this architecture. So on the front end, we pretty much deal with Razor View engine pages and with a little bit of jQuery, so the MVC pattern. And then on the business side, we're working with other libraries such as AutoFact and AutoMapper, which are nice. On the data access side, it was using Entity Framework. I'm going to touch on that a little bit here. But on the data side today, uses SQL Server, Redis for caching. There is some extra support for Azure. And they also introduced support for MySQL. We'll talk a little bit about that. So what I really like about this solution, it does continue to evolve in a very sensible way. So for example, where we had the version 3.9 of nopCommerce, it was targeting the 4.5.1 version of the framework. And when they moved from 3.9 to 4.0, that's when they were preparing for .NET Core. And moving from 4.0 to 4.1, that's when they actually started to compile to .NET Core. And so when it came to that migration of going to Core, they did this in a very sensible way, which they targeted version 2.1 of Core initially within the version 4.1 of nopCommerce. And when they moved to version 4.2, that's when they provided more support to run on Linux, just kind of supporting Linux as well as within Docker containers. And that's when they targeted version 2.2 of the framework. And moving from version 4.2 to 4.3, and 4.3 is the current version. That's where they did some refactoring of some data access, targeted the 3.1 version of Core, changed out a few things under the covers there. We'll look at that a little bit closer. So in moving from version 4.3 to 4.4, it's probably best to check out the GitHub issues of what's really coming there. I don't know if Postgres is coming out or not on the back end. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of work if you kind of see what's changed within the trunk version versus the version of 4.3. But yeah, I'm almost positive it's going to be a 4.4 version, not a 5.0 version for nopCommerce. But they are targeting the .NET framework or .NET version of 5.0. So yeah, this is a very timely talk from Scott for sure on where nopCommerce is headed. All right, let's look at some code here. We'll look at a little bit of the architecture. I'll touch on plugins just a little bit and themes a little bit and go from there. So the architecture, when you look at the projects within the solution, you have nopCore, which is kind of like where a lot of your common code is, even some of your common domains. Data that's really nop.data is for a lot of your data access being contained within there. And then nop.services, that's where you're going to find a lot of your business logic. Now, this is still kind of a monolith architecture, and understandably so. The team has been talking about actually even kind of breaking things up more into microservices. So we'll see how the versions to come kind of pan out for that. So nop.web is the storefront in which there is a project at nop.web.framework that is really a common library to where at one time nop.web was separate from the administrator. Now the administrator is part of the same website, so at one time there were two different websites. Then you have a handful of unit tests that span the solution, and there are a good handful of plugins that come out of the box when you download this initially. It's worth kind of not just kind of checking out the plugins here, but there are a lot of other plugins that you can find in the marketplace as well. So the architecture on the front end, you'll find that it's a kind of your typical MVC pattern where once a user makes a request into the web application, the controller instantiates a model and then also returns a view that has a reference to that model. So nothing too crazy on the front end side within the MVC architecture. Now that controller is going to call into a service. Usually it's called a service, might be called a factory, just different aspects that are containing business logic to work to really kind of prepare the data. That service is going to work with domain entities, and those domain entities will then get filled into the model. So the separation of concerns with this architecture are pretty well done from what I can see. The service will typically get its data through a repository pattern, in which that repository will work with what's called a domain mapper. Actually, they're called builders now. That changed from version 4.2 to 4.3. That mapper / builder will fill in a domain entity. So a lot of that mapper kind of information is like metadata around the entities that then get filled into the model. So again, the separation of concerns of this architecture are pretty well done. Even though it isn't a kind of a monolith type architecture, it still could be broken out if needed. Let's look at some code here. So I thought I'd pick on the repository pattern here and show how that's implemented, and also because things recently changed within 4.2 to 4.3. So here we are in the customer service class that's in nopServices, so kind of your business logic area. And that's kind of a pass-through when it comes to going to get that customer. And that customer repository is really just implementing the interface of iRepository of type customer. And that get by ID is just one of those methods that gets implemented. So that particular interface, iRepository, you have like a get by ID, insert, update, delete. You have a lot of your CRUD operations off of that interface. And I definitely have seen this pattern in quite a few architectures, which is kind of good to see here as well. So iRepository interface gets implemented from within the version 4.2 version of the nopCommerce, the EF repository. So this EF repository implements get by ID. It's kind of funny, even where you have comments inside the code of why it's done that way. So get by ID really just does an entities.find within entity framework. Now, there are some things here that were kind of new to me when looking at the repository pattern that I think are pretty cool for how nopCommerce was able to evolve their data access layer. So let's look at that. Hey, Scott, if you want to help out on muting, go right ahead. All right, there we go. All right. So let's move on from here. Here we have, looking at the EF repository, we have this table property that's of type iQueryable of T, which is really kind of a pass-through to the entities property for kind of working with the data in entity framework. So what's kind of cool here is that when working with this EF repository implementation of iRepository, here we are back in the service layer to where get customer by GUID, it's really doing more like a link to objects type query that's getting projected to entity framework to then handle that particular, to basically form and execute that particular query against the database. So this architecture has been in place for a while, but then, here recently, nopCommerce, where we had entity framework, they were able to switch out the repository implementation to link to DB. Now, we could argue that was a good or bad decision, or things could have simply just been better optimized in entity framework. But nonetheless, the community was asking to move away from entity framework. So they did move to link to DB, which that was more for the purpose of it was performance as well as being able to support other data stores such as MySQL and Postgres. I know is coming soon. So a little bit of background, Link to DB. It's kind of an in-between of what Entity Framework is and what a micro ORM is. So like Dapper, Massive, Petapoco. So it's a little bit lighter weight. But yeah, it's maybe not as popular as a lot of the other ORMs out there, but the implementation, because of the architecture, was pretty simple to put this in place. All right, so let's kind of wrap some of this up where we got, the marketplace is a great place to check out the different themes and extensions. There's paid for stuff there and a lot of free stuff as well. Highly recommend checking that out. There is a course out on Pluralsight that you really can't search for anymore. It is a little out of date, but there's a lot of things in there that are still good to kind of catch. So you can actually put in the URL and get this course on Pluralsight. There's a lot of stuff on YouTube as well. Matter of fact, Alex Wolf, the author of this, has a lot of his content on YouTube. So when it comes to talking about themes, you're really talking about the front end and what you can do there. And when it comes to plugins, you're really talking about what you can do on, changing business logic and really a lot of the controller type code and service layer. And also, if you want to have your plugin work with one or more tables, there's a migration pattern to where you can have your data store or your tables in the data store created on the install of your plugin. A theme is really just another folder of some more files out there. So there's definitely there would be a lot more to cover here, but a theme is more so a copy of the minimal components that you want to modify within the different views. All right, so here's my opinion of what the real value of this open source world is from a normal developer working a day job. I think there's a lot of things to look at when it comes to open source. So when you're trying to understand what being a full stack developer is, or maybe you're looking at something for a secondary income, such as nopCommerce, but in my opinion, there's this aspect of a reference architecture that I think every developer should have. So when it comes to becoming a full stack developer, this is a coding school here in St. Louis. I thought I'd use them as an example. So they have, you could become a Java full stack developer or a .NET full stack developer. There's a lot of different paths that developers can take nowadays, and it is kind of hard to kind of grab onto what is a stack and what should I follow. When it comes to full stack development, what is that exactly? It's really, front end, back end, databases, DevOps. When it comes to just the flow of things, mobile app development, you feel more like a generalist at most of the times when you kind of identify yourself as a full stack developer, but you do go deep on each one of these at one given time. But this is by far becoming a full stack developer is what a lot of different companies are looking for. So when it comes to becoming a full stack developer, in my opinion, you got to choose a stack. You need to actually choose a learning platform. I'll touch on that a little bit more. And also, I'd recommend choosing an open source solution. So choosing a stack, Microsoft and .NET is a great stack to kind of choose. When it comes to choosing learning platform, I choose Pluralsight. LinkedIn Learning, there's a lot of other ones out there that are really good to kind of go with, but I do recommend kind of diving deep into a learning platform. We'll touch on that. And choose an open source solution. nopCommerce is a great one for that. So of the different stacks out there, the way you kind of slice and dice all these different stacks, it's probably good to keep in mind that each one of these stacks are probably kind of, I don't want to say driven, but they're influenced by different companies. So Microsoft definitely influences the .NET stack, where Oracle would influence the Java stack, and Google, they've been pushing Go and a lot of other languages. So it's good to recognize certain companies are influencing certain stacks, and I recommend kind of picking one of those stacks as a basis for your learning. And the learning platforms out there, Pluralsight's a great one. LinkedIn Learning is definitely worth checking out. They've added so much content there. You could go subscription, a la carte, go free. I do recommend something that's like a subscription to where you're, if you pay for something a la carte, you're less likely to maybe watch something that you're trying to justify paying for. So, Pluralsight and LinkedIn Learning are kind of like the Netflix of online learning. And when it comes to open source solutions, one of the most popular ones is probably WordPress with when on the e-commerce side with WooCommerce, and you got Magento out there and Broadleaf in the Java space. But in the .NET space, there's a good handful of solutions that you could kind of look at and kind of adopt. Of course, I'd recommend nopCommerce after kind of looking at a lot of these different architectures. And to wrap this up with the opportunities out there, yes, you could, do something in the marketplace where you sell plugins and themes. You can get certified in nopCommerce, which is great. You could become a store owner and actually apply this software with a drop shipping site or downloadable content. But as a developer, I really think this is for you. When it comes to going through job interviews and things like that, you're asked a lot of times about your day job, and it's not necessarily good to give away secrets about your day job. If you are doing your own open source projects, you got to really be careful of talking about those because the company might think that you're wanting to implement your open source solution at that job. There is this third option of having something like nopCommerce to talk about in job interviews. That way you can kind of communicate best on how you understand, let's say, MVC, dependency injection, a lot of those different aspects. So that's, I think, the real opportunity for a regular .NET developer, looking at nopCommerce. So yes, go ahead and download it if you haven't already. Again, I know I might be giving this talk to a lot of people that are very familiar with nopCommerce, but I have a feeling we have kind of a 50-50 audience of people that have used nopCommerce regularly and have not. So yeah, version 4.3 was released over the summer. They have MySQL support and compiles a .NET Core 3.1, and they definitely improved on performance. The first meetup for this, I actually gave an overview of the 4.3 as well as interviewed Andre after that. That might be worth checking out. And again, the virtual, this meetup, it takes place the third Tuesday of every month. I did do an architecture walkthrough when I was up in Redmond about a year ago. So it might be worth checking out if you want a little more details on this architecture. So official site, nopcommerce.com, and nopdocs is like a shortcut to where you have, you can take you right to the nopCommerce documentation. Noptube is a shortcut, basically. It'll take you right to the nopCommerce YouTube channel. And NopMeetup will take you right to the meetup page. Nop Academy is something I'll be releasing in 2021, and that's really focused around online training, a little bit more community. There'll be different full stack cohorts that are based around nopCommerce and other training. I'll be using Microsoft Teams, and so people will have a 365 account when it comes to being in the Nop Academy. And I'm also digging into like Microsoft Viva Learning. That was recently announced. So I'll be intertwining learning from Pluralsight and or LinkedIn Learning into nopCommerce training. So if you, again, that'll be getting a release sometime in 2021. If you have any interest in that, feel free to email me at john@nopacademy.com. Since I announced doing this about 4 or 5 months ago, I probably get a couple emails a week when this is coming. So yes, please keep sending the emails to what you would expect out of something like Nop Academy for yourself. All right. So Scott, I'm ready to turn it over to you. And awesome. I'll be monitoring questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Cool. Let me share my screen.
Go right ahead. And I'll monitor chat with you. But there's usually for this size of a meetup, we take Q&A a little closer to the end, and we'll be purposely trying to have a cutoff because I know it's the middle of your work day as well. So at 12 p.m. Central Time. So.
Okay. So let's do this. Let's make sure everybody's muted. Okay. For folks that don't know me, hold on, I'm getting an echo here myself. Okay. For folks that don't know me, I'm Scott Hunter. Watching the nopCommerce stuff actually interests me quite a bit. Before I joined Microsoft, I built kind of my own commerce tech for some sites that I was working on. and I can sure as heck appreciate having all this stuff kind of pre-done for you. I always like to say, don't go reinvent that technology yourself when there's already experts that have already put it together and have it running in the real world. So, but folks that don't know me, I joined Microsoft back in 2007. I joined the ASP.NET team, and I've been here for quite a bit, and it's been a fun journey because .NET Core and ASP.NET Core were born during my time here, and it's been fun to get a chance to take a platform like .NET and kind of look back at our past 12 or so years of the .NET framework and get a chance to reinvent it, in my career here. So it's been fun. So I thought I'd kick off and just talk about .NET 5. We just shipped .NET 5 in early November, so just a couple months ago. Bunch of big features in .NET 5. We did a lot of work on single file applications and smaller containers. A lot of investments in web and cloud, specifically cloud native, and I'll talk to that today. Desktop, even though most of us think of the web, nopCommerce, desktop is still big in .NET, and we've brought all the desktop tech with us, and we're starting to enhance it. ARM64 is something you hear a lot about today, especially with the Apple M1 chips, Amazon having support for ARM64 in their cloud. And so you'll continue to see us add more ARM support to the .NET platform. Perf has been as we reinvented .NET with .NET Core, Perf was a big part of it. And you're going to see that we continue to making huge strides in Perf in .NET 5, and I hope to continue those with .NET 6. Of course, there's a new version of C# and F# with a bunch of language features. We'll show a few of those today as part of this. People always ask me, how is .NET doing in the world ecosystem, especially in an era when you hear about Node.js and Go and Rust and stuff like that. I also get a chance to dabble in Java quite a bit as part of my job, interestingly enough. And what I can tell you is, we're doing quite well. So for example, you can see here that .NET Core, which came out really in 2017, so we're about 4 years into this. We're about 2.2 million. This slide's a little old now. 2.2 million developers that have joined us in that space. On the Stack Overflow developer survey, we've been the most loved framework 2 years in a row, 2019 and 2020. Even though we open sourced super late, when I think of myself in Java, Java open sourced a good 5 or 6 years or 10 years in front of .NET. But we've still been one of the highest velocity projects in GitHub. We're the number 5 language in GitHub as well. And then, of course, on the Tech Empower benchmarks, which is a third-party benchmark, we are number 1 in many of these benchmarks, and that benchmark is one that we strive to improve in every year. Now, what's even cooler is if you look at .NET all up, we're about 5 million developers. And if you ask how that does in the real world, we estimate there's about 9 million Java developers, Java being probably the most prevalent platform on the planet today. And the fact that we're only a few million away from Java is, I think, an amazing number. If you look at some of the crazy numbers we've had over 200,000 of our WinForm and WPF developers move their projects to the .NET Core stack. If you look back just in like September and October, each of those 2 months, we added over 230,000 brand new developers to the .NET Core platform each of those months, September and October of last year. This kind of gives you an idea of what the growth velocity is for .NET. And then, of course, .NET Core was our first version of .NET that supported Linux. And now you can see we have over 2 million publishes to Linux a month from our tool change, and showing that people are adopting and using .NET on Linux. One of the most amazing things about .NET is the fact that we actually do live in a world of all these vendors. I consider nopCommerce to be one of those types of vendors. It's amazing open source technology available to .NET developers. There's also commercial offerings. You can see some of my partners here: DevExpress, Infragistics, Telerik, Radzen, Grape City, Syncfusion. These are all folks that actually had controls available for WinForms or WPF or Blazor day 0 for .NET 5. And so it's good to see them, embracing us. At the same time, there's tons of OSS partners as well. This is little weighted towards Blazor, and it was kind of designed this way because all those other control vendors did Blazor, and so that you can see, Blazor extensions, Blazorize, Blazor Strap. But you can see some other common ones as well, like Identity Server, things like Swashbuckle, Uno Platform as well. But I can't put enough slides in to show all these things. There would be, hundreds of these that are out there, and just want to thank the community for, embracing our tech. This is the Tech and Power benchmark, and this is showing round 19. This is with ASP.NET Core 3.1. And the benchmark's kind of cool because if you look, even though ASP.NET's #1, it's not the official Microsoft test. The one that's #1 is actually one that the Red Hat team, Red Hat actually has .NET Core built into Red Hat, and they work on .NET Core as well. And so they own the benchmark that's #1 here today at 7.3 million requests a second. Now, what's cool is that was .NET Core 3.1. If you look at .NET 5, you can see the plain text benchmark is up 38%. The 7 million is now 11 million. The JSON benchmark, which was one we weren't as fast in, is one we crawled up into the top 5 with a 42% gain at 1.2 million requests a second. Our goal was to surpass Java in that benchmark, and we have. And then the hardest benchmark there, which is the most real world and affects you the most, is what we call fortunes. And that's a benchmark that's actually serving web content. It's making database calls. It's doing all that stuff. And you can see we're at 417,000 requests a second. That's up 20%. And so to me, it's pretty amazing that, we're version 5, and we're still seeing 38, 42, 20% performance gains, year over year. It gets even better. If I look at sockets, we also want to make sure that we are super fast on Linux. The Tech and Power benchmark is a Linux benchmark, by the way. And you can see here that we're 30% faster on sockets. JSON serialization is up 20%. The one that's most impressive to me is gRPC, which is kind of a modern way of thinking of things like WCF. We are faster than Java, C++, Go. And we think we're faster than Rust, but this benchmark was last run in August before we RTM'd. And the next time it runs, I'll update the slide, and I expect that we'll be faster than Rust. And so it's pretty cool that .NET is hand in hand faster than all these other platforms. So now let's kind of go through, and we'll go through a couple of topics. We'll do some desktop really quick, and then we'll move on to some web and some Blazor and stuff like that. Desktop is something that when we did the first versions of .NET Core, we didn't bring desktop. Then we went and looked at the numbers and saw that we had millions of desktop developers still today building desktop apps. And so we said, hey, let's go bring desktop to .NET Core. We brought it in 3.1, and we made it better in 5. So in 5, we finished, for the most part, the WinForms Designer. We still have some personal reliability challenges there, but we're working on those still. WPF Designer is full tilt. We had a ClickOnce support back. That was the #1 most requested feature after shipping 3.1. And we're starting to see our third-party vendors show up in the designers as well. And of course, why move your desktop app to .NET 5? Well, you don't have to have .NET on the box. You can build a self-contained single exe if you want. You get better performance across the board. You get access to things like WebView 2. That's the new Edgeium browser that we have on Windows that's Chrome-based. So let's take a look at one of these things. So I've got a simple application here. I should have a VS running. I call this a Goo-Hoo-Ha. That stands for Guthrie, Hunter, and Hanselman, the 3 prominent Scots at Microsoft. And I want to show a couple things off here. #1 is I can open up the designer here. The designer is actually a challenge for us because the Visual Studio is built on .NET Framework. And so the way we make the actual designer work is it actually runs out of process, which is crazy, which means we boot up a .NET 5 project outside of this, and we blit the screen into the Visual Studio space. And this is showing a WebView 2. So this is something that whether you're .NET Framework or .NET Core or .NET 5, there is a WebView 2 control. That's the Chromium-based Edge browser. And this means you can actually just run this here. you can put a modern browser into any of your .NET apps. This is basically the equivalent of putting Chrome in. And it was funny when John was showing some of the learning tech earlier, I was going to think if you go to the .NET website, this is dot.net, there's a live TV link up here. And you can see right here, we have a lot of live content that we do too. The On.NET show, which John showed, C# Corner, .NET Community Stand-Up, C# with Jeff Fritz, .NET Doc Show. So we have tons of learning content that we are putting out every day as well. Now, and I could have told you this was going to happen. I'm running a beta version of this tech, and I should have closed that window before I did this. But guess what? I work at Microsoft. I know how to fix these problems. So let me just nuke that. There we go. So I'm running a version of Visual Studio that does not like that edge control to be in the designer. And so what it does is it actually causes a path too long problem in the project. This is supposed to be fixed now, but I'm a believer of not changing demos before doing a demo. So the real thing I wanted to show here was I'm going to scroll this down a little bit, and you can see I've got to choose your Scott here. I can go to the toolbox over here, and the cool thing here is I should. Let's try this. And you can see these are tiller controls, and so I'm showing one of the first cases of having third-party controls back inside of the designer. I should be able to put that over here. And let's just rename that to drop-down list Scott. Save that. And now let's make sure we save that. Go to F7 here. And let's write a little bit of code here. I want to data bind that drop-down list to my data here. Let me make sure I did that right. I did not. Scott drop down list. There we go. Now IntelliSense makes me happy. There we go. And then I'll set some styles on it, and you can see this is just a list of Scotts and our Twitter URIs. So let's build it one more time and run it. And the main thing I'm showing here is we have a designer, and now we have some support for third-party controls showing up, trying to get back to that parity that we had with .NET Framework. And this does exactly what you would expect. But let me show you one more cool thing about this app. I'll show you a C# 9 feature here. This does exactly what you would expect. Here is my my public class of Scotts. It's got a constructor. It's got these parameters. There's a really cool feature that we added called records in .NET 5 that makes this much simpler. Look at this. That's what is that 10 lines of code there? Let's comment that out and comment in a record. And all my record is public record Scott. It takes a name and a Twitter URI, and from that we'll automatically create the name property and we'll create the Twitter URI property. And so all of this code comes down to this code. And so what our goal here is to make it where you have to write less code as a .NET developer. And I'm sure you have reams of files full of these huge classes that you can now knock down to one line. And so I took an app that had like 10 of these files and replaced 10 files with one file with 10 lines of C# in it. And this should run exactly like it did before. The behavior is exactly the same. It's just less code for you to write. And so huge feature, very happy with. Final thing to show here, if I click publish, We've got ClickOnce support added back. I can go and I want to publish to a folder. There's ClickOnce. And I could go through the wizard and set this up. And you're back to building a desktop app with .NET 5. They can be self-contained and installed on any machine. So with that, let's close that out. Let's go back here. Mobile development. A big mobile development work is going to happen this year as part of .NET 6. But we did ship Xamarin Forms in December. Bunch of cool new features with new brushes, shapes, and paths. One of the big things that we've done is the XAML developer experience is now exactly the same for WPF. So we actually use the same designer for both Xamarin and for WPF. Our hot reload technology is now synchronized as well between WPF and Xamarin as well. And for folks that don't know this, with all this, with the new XAML experience and the hot reload feature that we have, you can build iOS apps on a Windows machine with no Mac now. You can basically take any iDevice, plug it into your Windows machine. We'll see it, and then you can control F5 directly from Visual Studio to your iDevice without any Mac, any tech in the way. It's really, really super fast, and it's part of our goal of making it easier to build apps. Let's talk about Visual Studio. We shipped Visual Studio 2019. There was an update in November with .NET 5, and it was called 16.8, and it brought a lot of stuff. Obviously, .NET 5 is included. It has a brand new Git experience. We have Linux debugging for .NET projects, and I'll show that. It's got that new XAML experience I showed before, and we've added some amazing tech, so you can easily publish any project that's in GitHub to Azure using GitHub Actions, and I'll show a few of these things. So let me bring up a preview build of VS, and I will load up Web App Linux. And this is a Razor Page application that's actually running .NET 3.1, or .NET Core 3.1. But one of the coolest features of it is, if I look at the app, the main change I made on the app here, if I go to my index page, you can see what I do is I write out to the screen the OS version. And let's just Control F5 this project. And it's going to do exactly what you expect. It's going to write to the screen that, hey, I'm running on Windows. Look at that. Windows NT 10.09, blah, 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 blah. Now, what I can do is I can come back here, I can take the drop down, and I can select WSL2. This stands for the Windows Subsystem for Linux. This is a feature we built into Windows 10 about a year and a half ago. And it lets you run Linux on your Windows machine. It's pretty crazy. I can go to my terminal here. I could type, open a new tab. I could say WSL, and now I'm in Linux on my Windows machine. Now, what's even cooler is, we built all that into Visual Studio, and so because I've now selected WSL2, if I run my application, even though I'm on a Windows machine, I'm now running my ASP.NET Core application on Ubuntu. And so I can now natively develop on my Windows machine on Linux, and everything works just like you would expect. I can go back to my Visual Studio. I could put a breakpoint on this line if I wanted to. And the debugger will just kick off and fire and run just like you would expect. Now let's show another feature. I said there's a new Git experience. And so now we made it super simple to take your application and put it into Git. So I'll just click this. It found my GitHub account already set up here. I gave it a name, make it private, and I can say create and push. And so literally in a one click, I've taken my application here, I put it into source control, it's up in Git. You can see it just went up. If I go to my browser and I go look at my repositories, I do a refresh, there's my Web App Linux. That simple, that fast to get into GitHub. Now, it's even better. As I said before, we have this new support for what we call GitHub Actions. So with that, I can right-click and I can do a publish like I've always done before. And I could say I want to publish this to Azure. And I could say, let's go to Azure App Service Windows. It doesn't really matter. It's kind of funny, it's a Linux app, but we'll put it there. I can go and select my app service. And now there's this new deployment type right here. And notice on that deployment type, there's now CI/CD using GitHub Actions. This is a free feature, and I'll select that. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to go add a new file to GitHub, and this will set up my GitHub Actions for me. And this is great. Notice we now have a. We didn't do this at first. There is a. I need to commit and push to get my workflow file up there because it's just a local file on my machine. And as soon as I publish that up there, let's give it a second here. There it goes. If I go back up to my GitHub and I click on my repo and I click on Actions, you can notice that there's a workflow now running. This is pretty cool. I can click on this, click on it again, and now I can see up in the Azure cloud, I can see my workflow now running. It's going to basically build my app live in a GitHub action and then publish it to Azure. So you can see it's doing a step to make sure it's got the right version of .NET Core inside of its build engine. And so it's installing the right version of this stuff here right now. And this will just go ahead and build and publish my app up to Azure App Service. And so this is great for doing teamwork because once I've done this, if I shared my GitHub repo with you or anybody on the call, anytime you made a change, it's going to trigger a build and a push up to Azure, and it's also going to run any of our tests, and we would know right away if any of us broke the build, and we'd all be able to check and try the build live in the cloud. And so this is showing you the productivity we're trying to give you with both getting your code into GitHub and then using the GitHub Actions feature to let you build and deploy your application live. And so you can see it's if I go open one of these up, you can see all the stats of us doing the build in here. You can see it's doing the publish now. Publish just finished. It's doing a post action cleanup, and we're good to go. And as I said, anytime you push to the GitHub repo, all this is going to fire off again. And if I go to my dashboard over here, go to App Service, my Windows App Service here, there should be a. Give it a second here. There's a URI for my application. And if all goes well, I'll click that, and there's that same app we showed before running in Azure App Service. So that's just showing you some of the productivity improvements we've had in the tool since then. Now let's talk about web and cloud. Blazor, we shipped the first version of Blazor with .NET Core 3. And then about halfway through the year after that, we shipped the first version of Blazor with WebAssembly. And for folks that don't know, Blazor is a framework that lets you build a SPA type application, but you keep all your code in C#. We have two flavors of Blazor. We have Blazor Server, where we do all the work on the server. And we have one called Blazor WebAssembly, where we do all the work inside the browser. We actually use a feature called WebAssembly that all the major browsers support that lets us actually run C# directly inside the browser. The benefits of that is your app can be fully offline and in the web. And so we made a huge pile of enhancements for Blazor WebAssembly in .NET 5. One of those is WebAssembly support uses Mono, and just like our Xamarin apps do. Mono is a flavor of .NET that lets us build native applications. And so a WebAssembly app is technically a native application. And we're slowly moving our Mono stack to use all the tech from .NET Core. And so you can see now it says it uses the .NET Core framework libraries. What this means is Mono used to have its own implementation of what we call the BCL, the base class libraries. That's string and date and all the core features of .NET. We've now moved the Mono that Blazor runs on top of to use the .NET 5 core BCL libraries. In .NET 6, we'll move all of the Xamarin projects that run on Mono. They will use the .NET 6 core BCL. So we're moving the tech we're continuing our unification. Blazor WebAssembly is 3 times faster, and it's got server-side pre-rendering, which means your app starts faster, and it lazily loads any of its dependencies. Once again, this is to make your app start up. We've got component virtualization. This lets you put a grid of like 1,000,000 rows on a screen without having to have the browser spin forever. We've got a cool feature that lets us actually isolate your CSS and JavaScript. We can also package them with your components now. And then, of course, there's a huge ecosystem of third-party components for Blazor. So let's play with some Blazor here. So what I'll do is I'll come up here, and I've got a Blazor Net 5 application here. And a couple things I want to show off here is the first thing is this app is using Blazor WebAssembly in .NET 5. It's using one of my favorite features. All of us, when we go to the web and when we hit these single-page applications, that the app comes up and then you either get a circle if it's loading, or the app kind of comes up with a blank page and you have to wait 5 or 6 seconds for the whole screen to fill in. Well, we want to address that and make sure that at least for .NET applications, you don't see that. And so you've got this WebAssembly pre-rendered. This means we're going to render the first version of the page at compile time, which means the app loads instantaneously. And then with this lazy loading feature, we don't even have to load all the assemblies right away. We will actually load things as you go and move through the application. And the idea is to make the app not have that slow kind of chunky feel to it. So let's run the Blazor app. And normally a Blazor app, you'll get a slight loading circle. And in this case, the page just came right up. And if I click the refresh button, it just comes right up. Let me just everybody again. And so that's our goal. I'm clicking home and refresh a billion times, and you'll see nothing change here. And that's a part of this improved performance that we do with that. Now, what else do we have? There's a bunch of other things I've got here as well. Okay, so next thing is this is a WebAssembly application, and because it's a WebAssembly application, it means that there's plenty of code that you cannot call. WebAssembly means the .NET application is running in the browser. Inside the browser, you're in a sandbox, and inside of that sandbox, you just can't call anything out there. That would be illegal because obviously that sandbox isn't going to let you do. There's plenty of things you're not going to be able to do. And so, what can we do here? And so, if I come over here, where did I stick this code? I stuck it right in here. Let's say I try to do something like, this is the main for my application. What if I did console.readLine? This would be something that, what if I did this in the right application? There we go. What if I did this in the Blazor application? Well, what I'd want is I'd want the tech to actually tell me I can't do that. And so here you can see it that says this call site is unsupported, and it's unsupported because the browser is unsupported on browser. So we now have an analyzer built into all the Blazor applications that tells you when you're using an API that you shouldn't try to use. And that's pretty cool. Now let's go look at virtualization. So if I go to my fetch data page, and let's just run the app real quick here. Let's go to fetch data, and notice that I'm showing the weather forecast for the next, how many? 100,000 days. I've got this tiny scroll bar here. And notice how fast the app is. I just scroll and I'm good to go. let's load the browser tools up. And as I move that scroll bar, you can see the network calls are happening. One for every time I scroll the scroll bar. I'm showing 100,000 rows of data on this page, but the app is super fast. It didn't send that 100,000 lines down to the browser. How did it do that? Well, if I go look at my page, normally I would have a for loop here over my pile of data, but I'm using my new virtualization tag here. And so what I can do is basically put a virtualization tag in here, and then I give it an items provider. That's the method to call. And that method here, you can see basically it returns. It's going to take a iProvider request. That's going to have some parameters that are going to make a lot of sense. It's going to say what's the start index, how many to go get, and my method just returns that data. And so from that, we will do all the virtualization for you. And then as we print a row, it goes inside of this item content and it has access to the actual data. And we just make it that easy to put 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 rows of data on the page for you. You have to write none of the code for it other than just the fetcher. Let's show another cool feature that we have in .NET 5. This is a Blazor component. If I go down here and scroll down, you can see I've got a Razor class library. And inside of my Razor class library, I've got my component.razor. And this is basically where I can build my own controls. And so in this case, notice I've got my component here. It's got its own CSS. There's the class, my component. Where is that CSS? It used to be in .NET Core 3.1, you'd have to go manually put that CSS. You'd have to import that into the main application. But now, if I click this down arrow here, you can see that I've got my component.razor.css. I can basically name this the same as my component, and that lets us actually know that you want us to include that and bundle that with your component. And then I can just go into my Razor page, and I can just reference the component. And with that, we will bring in the JavaScript that's in the class library. We'll bring in the CSS in the class library. We'll also make sure they're isolated and can't walk over each other. So if you name these things the same across two controls, they won't conflict, and you get a pretty cool experience. And so if I go and run this again, I didn't have to run it actually. That's a feature I'll have to show you in a second here as well. Now you can see my component came in. It's got the styling. I didn't change anything in my Blazor project. I just referenced the component and I was good to go. Now what's cool as well is you might not have noticed something here. If I go here and say, today is Feb 16, and I just press save. If I go back to my browser, notice that the browser just updated. I didn't rerun the application. This is a feature that all ASP.NET projects now have. If I go back to my Visual Studio, it's not on by default for everything. Go down here, go to projects, ASP.NET Core. I hope to turn this on for every project in the future. Notice auto build and refresh browser after saving changes. This is a new feature we put in to make it easier for your inner loop again. So I'll just make a save again, come back over here, and it'll take a second or two, and this should update. Did I save? I see it doing work. I did not save earlier, obviously. There it goes. There's the circle of the browser. It updates. One of the big features we're going to do in .NET 6 is we're going to make the performance from pressing that save to seeing the change in the browser faster. It's a couple seconds today. We want to get that to sub 1 second in .NET 6. So that's just a handful of quick browser features or Blazor features that we've added in .NET 5. Let's jump back here again. Let's talk about cloud native investments. Once again, we know that microservices and containers are a big thing, and we have great support for REST APIs in .NET, and we've added even better support in .NET 5. Notice it says OpenAPI. OpenAPI is a spec that describes your REST endpoints. There's a couple packages for .NET that support this. One is called Swashbuckle. Swashbuckle is now on by default in any web APIs. And from that, I can actually then give you a bunch of new features. Like one is what we call an API REPL. Makes it easy to do an inner loop on your API. Inner loop being make a change, try it, make a change, try it. We can do client generation. One of our most requested features from WCF for REST was, hey, REST APIs are great, but I really like WCF being able to generate the client for me. Well, with OpenAPI built in, you can right-click and we'll generate the client for you. We can now publish your API directly with the OpenAPI tech to Azure API Management if we wanted to as well. So let's go and take a look at that real quick. So I'll just do file new, project, and let's do an ASP.NET Core application, and we'll call this NoOp API. And then for my project, what I'll do is I'll select over here, I want to build a web API. And notice that there is this new Open API support, which is checked by default. I can click create. And the main change is we've added Swashbuckle in the project for you, and we've hooked it all up for you. This means when you run this API, web API, normally you would just get a blank screen because there's no HTML to be served. But now, if I run the API, I'm going to get this awesome page where I can easily test the API right from the browser. I can click try it out, execute. There's the result of my API right there. I also get access to the Swagger. This is that API definition that describes my API. I can take the Swagger, I can save it. Let's save it right to my download folder here. There we go. And that Swagger helps me. It gives me a bunch of other capabilities. Let's close that out too. First off, it gives me access to what I'm going to call the API REPL. I can change my browser to the H3 REPL. And now if I control F5 my project, I landed in a CLI. I can do an LS. I can go into my weather forecast. Before I showed you I could run the app in the browser and I had to go click a bunch of times to actually get to call my API. Now I just type get. There's my calls. I can just alt tab back to VS. I can make a change, come back over here, run get again, and see the result of my change. And so we're trying to make that inner loop once again faster. And so it's very easy to call and test your APIs right from a console. Something else that I can do real quick as well. I need to switch the browser back. Switch back to the real browser. I could have done this as well. I could have done an Azure Publish. In this case, I could select this. I don't know why it's not finding my target. I'll cheat. Just want to show one more. I'm not going to actually do a publish, but I wanted to show a new capability that we added. Let's do this. I'll select the same one again, even though I've already published to that. Notice that it said there's a new feature here, Azure API Management. If you're building APIs, you might want to put them behind a service like Azure API Management, where you can actually see, you can control access to them via this. You can throttle, you can set rules up, and notice it went and found my API inside of Azure API Management. I could click here. We would both publish the app to Azure App Service. We would then publish the API directly to Azure API Management. So we're making all these things closer and tighter and cooler together. There we go. So let's go back over here. And, gRPC, we do all the same capabilities. If you build a gRPC application in .NET, we will go and build the client for you as well. And we give you that world-class performance. Cloud native investments, smaller, faster containers. There's a couple things we've done here. If I go back to my VS, I can show real quick. Let's jump out of here. let me open up a project. This is a API that we wrote in .NET Core 3.1. And while that's up, I will also open up one more of these. And I will open up a .NET 5 microservice. There's a couple of cool differences between these. So if I go back and show you the 3.1 microservice, let's take a look at this. This is kind of the smallest API you can build in .NET. This has got a public static main. I create a builder, and inside of that, I just call run, and I say, anytime that the API is called, just write hello world out to the screen. And let's take a look at this. This is like, I don't know, 8 to 22. It's 10, 15 lines of code. Does what you would expect. If I run it, it's going to write hello world out to the screen. Simple, small API. Now, there's a couple of cool things that you might not know about. This is features we added in the previous version of .NET. If I go to publish, I've already done this once before, but if I go to publish, there are some cool things here. Let me click this. Notice that I've done a couple things here. Number one, I selected self-contained. This could be either framework dependent or self-contained. Self-contained means I don't want the app to require .NET. We take a copy of .NET and put it in the app. So I built self-contained. Now, self-contained normally would be a lot of files. I don't want a lot of files. So I've also clicked produce single file. This means we'll take your entire application, put all of .NET in it and your application in it, and put it into a single file. Then I've also clicked trim unused assemblies. This means then strip out all the stuff that I'm not using and make me the smallest possible application. So what does that look like? Let's go click here. I'll copy the path. Go in the publish folder here. That did not do what I wanted. Fire the team now. There they are. Bin, release. Too many folders, I know. But you notice here that 3.1, that generated roughly a 45 meg application, which doesn't sound bad. It's a .NET application, does not require .NET to be on the machine at all. 45 megs, great. So let's go take the same app and look at it in 5. Now, the first thing to notice is, wow, the app is 16 lines of code versus 23 lines of code. Well, what's left? Why is it smaller? Notice there's a public class program and a public static void main in the 3.1 application. I don't need those anymore. We asked ourselves, we kind of put a main in because every other language had a main. In this case, this is a new feature that we have in C#9, and it lets you just start writing code. You don't have to write any of that junk anymore. So instead of having the class that wrapped everything, it's gone. Having the static main, gone. All I do is I come here and I just start writing code. So it reduces the amount of boilerplate you have to write for your application. Now, this is also a .NET 5 application. It's got those same publish features that you saw before. If I go and click publish, and I've got it set the same way. Click the show all, and it's got the single file, trim unused assemblies. Let's do this the simpler way this time, and we'll copy that, and I'll go to bin, release, net5, publish, and now let's take a look at that single exe. 21 megs. So we cut that in half. And this is a goal of us, is to make .NET applications smaller and smaller from version to version. And you'll see with .NET 6, this gets even better. So less lines of code to write a microservice, and your underlying microservice ends up being smaller as well if you decide to make it a single exe. So that's some of the improvements we're making there. Let me close a few of these things out. And let me start up Docker for desktop here, because we're going to go into container land now. So let's go back to the deck. So I've shown you smaller, faster microservices, single file apps, top level programs. That's that feature in C# that lets you not have the static void main and having the program. And I want to show Project Tye. And Project Tye is an experiment. We plan to ship this experiment this fall. And our goal with Project Tye is to make building multi-part .NET applications easier and faster, make them easier to get to the cloud, and all those types of things. I'm going to switch to VS Code right now because this is a preview feature. We don't have the support for it in Visual Studio yet, but it will come this year. And make sure I didn't have a slide there. Let's show Project Tye off. So I'll minimize down here, and I'm in a folder. Let's run VS Code. And what I've got is I've got a multi-project application here. So if I look in, here, let's look here. I'm going to have a microservice. I'm going to have more than one microservice actually. So notice I've got a front-end app and I've got a back-end app. And if I'm going to run those today, in Visual Studio, you can do start multi-project, but it's kind of cumbersome and clunky. We want to fix that. What I would likely do is I would come here and I would go, let's go to source back Tye, front end. There we go. And I would go over here, see back source, back Tye, back end. I've got a front end, a back end application, and I would probably do something like this: .NET run, get the back end app running. Maybe I'd do a .NET run over here to get the front end project running. That one's going. Give this one a second to boot up. There, it's running as well. And then maybe I would try my application, copy that URI, go to my browser, and I can tell you what's going to happen here. It's not going to work. And no connection could be made because the target machine actively refused it. So what actually happened here was my front-end app tried to call the back-end app and it failed because it didn't know the right port or IP address for the application. Bummer. You can see lots of errors. We can close that out. Don't need that anymore. I'll stop that. Cumbersome. So let's go look at the app in VS Code. We'll go to my front-end app, and I'll go to my startup file right here. And what you're going to see is I've hard-coded the local host and the port for my application. That's a bad idea. And so one of the things we're going to do is we're going to change the framework. We're going to change the framework where we can help you here. So let me open up. Let's do a couple things here. Let's open up the CS Proj. And I'm going to uncomment this line. This won't be required. This will just be built in the future. Yeah, sure, do a restore for me. And what this does is brings a library in that knows what Project Tye is. I go back to my startup CS, and I'll comment that out. I'm going to comment this line in. Instead of having that hard-coded URI, I'm just now going to call the backend by its name, backend, and I'm good to go. What's going to happen is Project Tye is going to automatically go and find all the ports and IPs of all the parts that are running. It's going to inject them in as environment variables, and I just call something and call things by their names, and we do all that mapping for you. The next thing is I can just come over here and I'm going to do Tye run. I didn't go run each of the projects individually. I can run Tye run, and what it's going to go do is it's going to go find all the folders of the applications, and it's going to start them up for me automatically. And it gives me access to this, which is the coolest feature. This is something we should have done like 10 years ago. And imagine this will all be in VS in the future as well. It gives me a dashboard. This is pretty cool. So now from one screen, I can see my front-end project running. I can see my back-end project running. I get access to the logs for each of my projects. Pretty cool. Logs for the back-end. Pretty cool. I can click the front-end, and now the front-end can see the back-end because Tye automatically did all that mapping for me. This is important because as I publish this to Azure, all those ports and things are going to change again. And we need to manage that for you. So this dashboard's pretty cool. So let's take this app even further. I'm going to stop it. Now what I want to do is I want to add caching to this. I'm going to add a Redis cache. So I'll go back to my CS proj, and I'm going to reference the Redis cache NuGet package. We'll do restore again. And I'm going to go to my startup again. And what I'll do is I'll dependency inject that cache into my project. Notice again, I don't have to know what port or whatever it is. I just call it, connection string for Redis, and I'm good. Now I need to modify my project to use the cache. This is features that already exist in .NET, ASP.NET today. Notice there's something called a distributed cache tag helper. So this exists today. It's not tied to Redis. It can work with anything, memory cache. It can run with Redis or whatever. And I give my cache a name, and I tell it to expire after X number of seconds. And what it does is this tag helper will take all the content inside of it and put it in that memory cache, and will only call the actual code every 5 seconds that you refresh the screen. Now that's great. I've got all my code written, but I need a Redis cache. Well, in the past, what we'd all do is we're .NET developers. We'd go and Google Redis or Google SQL Server or Google Postgres, and we install it on our machine, and we'd be mad at ourselves because, man, I put this thing on my machine, and now maybe I'll have to pay my machine at some point in the future. We don't want you to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here. I'm going to say Tye init. And what Tye init's going to do is it's going to create a config file for me. It's going to do the same thing that Tye run did. And it's going to go out and find, hey, there was a front-end project, it's a back-end project. This is kind of how we configure this. Now, what's cool is notice these have a type, project, where they point to a CS proj. Well, I've got a notepad sitting over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go add this couple lines of text to my project. We'll just stick it right down here. And so instead of installing Redis, I'm just going to put Redis in my config file. And instead of it pointing to a project, it's going to point to an image. That's a container image. So it's going to go out to the container registry. It's going to pull down a Redis cache, and it's going to run that for a container. I didn't have to write a Docker file or any of that kind of stuff. I just added these couple of lines of boilerplate, and I can go back to my command prompt, and I can type Tye run. And now it's going to go and look at that config file. It's going to say, hey, there's a Redis cache there. It's going to know to go fetch that running image from Microsoft Container Registry. It went and grabbed all the bits that we needed here. And if I go look at my dashboard again, let's go here. Now there's a new project here. There's my Redis on my machine. Once again, I didn't install Redis. It's just running as a container. Nothing's corrupted. You didn't have to write the Docker files. It's all here. If I run the front end again, let's go here. Now, if I start pushing refresh, the screen doesn't change. There it goes. It just changed. Still refreshing. It's now cached. Nothing installed. Clean. Good to go. That's amazing. Now, I know my app's going to run as containers in the real cloud. What if I want to run the entire app as containers? Once again, I don't want to run all that stuff. And so if I come here and I do Tye run -- help, notice that there's a feature here. Well, there's a couple cool features here while I'm thinking here. There's number one, there's -- Docker. That means run everything as containers. And there's -- watch. That lets me just have the app restart when I make a change. So I could do Tye run -- Docker. And now we're going to run everything in Linux. Once again, I'm on a Windows machine. Because of the power of containers, I can run Linux on my machine. So it all boots up again. And now I'm actually simulating exactly how I'm going to run in the real world. Go back to my dashboard. And notice my dashboard was saying project, container. Now when I refresh the dashboard, it's container, container, container. I'm now running the entire app exactly how I'm going to run in the cloud. I click this. I'm running containers. All the ports change. That's fine because Tye's doing all that port management for me. And that's pretty simple. Now let's take this to the full extent. I've got my entire app, multi-parts, microservices. I've got my Redis cache. I'm running in containers. I want to publish all this to Azure. All I'm going to do is to Tye deploy -interactive. And it goes, hey, I want to go to the cloud. To publish your containers to the cloud, I need a container registry. I just happen to have one of those. Let's go to my dashboard here. Here's my container registry. And I'll copy the URI. I'll come down here and paste that in. That's good to go. So it's now going to publish my containers up to the cloud. Oops. Dang. What's happening here? What it basically told me is it needed to log into my containers. Shows you how real this is. Okay, so now it should be able to do that. Also, I forgot something. Kubernetes is complicated. I need an ingress server. So let's put my ingress server in here. And I know I'm editing a file and I'm putting junk in it that's kind of complicated. It still doesn't seem super complicated. My entire file is 20 lines of code, but it's more than you want to write. And so we'll do all this for you. We'll just say have Tye add ingress, Tye add Redis. I'm just showing you a preview of where we're trying to get at. So let's run this again. Okay, let's go back. Let's copy that. Should have access to everything now because I've logged in. It said, hey, I noticed that you had a Redis. And Azure runs Redis as a service. So why don't you give me your connection string to your Redis service? Go back to my dashboard. I've got my Redis sitting right here. I go to access keys, copy that connection string, paste that in. And so now we've taken this simple app running on my machine with a single command. I'm able to actually publish this up to Kubernetes, which is complicated. I didn't write any Docker files. I did write that semi-complicated Tye YAML file, but we'll make that better in the future. And now I should be able to do kubectl get front end. And it's going to complain for a little bit here. This will come up in just a second. I will go back to slides and we'll come back and run that one more time and show you the final bits of that as that finishes its cloud. Other cool thing is we shipped .NET 5 in November and we had it available in Azure App Service day 0. This is brand new to us. Last year, it took us half a year to get us into App Service. We will now be on these things day 0 moving forward. And when .NET 6 comes out, the first preview it's going to come out pretty soon, almost any day now. It'll be available in App Service day 0 as well. I already did that demo. This is the Project Tye slides that I have. This is just showing the goal of Project Tye is to make it where your front end or your back ends can find each other via conventions. I then showed you how I was able to add dependencies. That could be a SQL Server or a Redis cache just by adding a line into my Tye YAML file. We'll grab the container from the container registry, run it for you locally. You didn't really install and put that stuff on your machine. Because of Tye, you saw I was able to just do Tye run, and we ran it for you locally. I was able to do Tye run -- Docker. We can run it in containers for you. You're using Kubernetes locally, mimicking the how you're going to run in the cloud, but without all the complications. Then I showed that there was a dashboard, and from that dashboard, you could see all the parts that were running. You could actually launch them. You could see the logs. The perf counters are there too. And then I showed how easily I could take all that application, I could Dockerize it, and I could publish it up to the cloud right from the command line using Tye deploy -I. Now, as we go forward, we have too many .NETs. There's .NET Framework, which we could never change because it's a part of Windows. It's a Windows component. I couldn't change it, and so .NET Core was kind of born out of the fact for .NET to grow, we were going to have to go rebuild something that was cross-platform, open source, and all those things. It needed to have breaking changes against .NET Framework, and so we had to build a new one. And then, of course, we acquired Xamarin, And so we have these three .NETs, and we're on this path to merge all this tech together. And so, and what that means is, .NET Framework will always remain .NET Framework. We'll never add all the capabilities. We're done adding things from .NET Framework to .NET, Core / .NET 5. But we can make .NET 5 be all the things that we want. And that means there's a single BC, a single SDK. So in .NET 6, there'll be a single SDK that builds every one of the project types, whether it's a mobile app on Xamarin, it's a desktop application, a web application, a single SDK. You heard me talk when we talked about Blazor WebAssembly, how it uses the same BCL as .NET 5. The Xamarin apps will use the same BCL in .NET 6. And the Xamarin apps are also going to move to the new CS Proj format. So all of our .NETs are in one SDK, they have one BCL, and they have a single project type across them. We're going to have awesome cross-platform native UI. That's going to be with the Xamarin Tech that we're going to rebrand to .NET MAUI. We're going to have awesome cross-platform web UI. This is either MVC or Blazor or any combination of that. We have awesome web tech in .NET. We're going to have awesome cloud-native investments. I've already shown you how you can build locally on Linux on a Windows machine. I showed you how you can build a single exe that's super small. I showed you microservices that don't require a lot of code. I showed you that work with OpenAPI to make it easier to build APIs and host them in the cloud and run a REPL to test them. I didn't show you that you could right-click on that project and create a client, but it's there as well. And then I showed you, those performance improvements that were like 42%, 38%, 20%, from .NET Core 3.1 to .NET 5. We will continue to make those same kinds of improvements again and again, version to version. And I believe that at the end of this .NET 6 wave, we will have the best breed of solutions for all modern workloads. If you want to build the best desktop app, use .NET. The best web app, use .NET. The best mobile app, use .NET. And we're back to having a single unified platform, which is our goal. If you look at our schedule, we shipped last November, we shipped .NET 5. .NET 6 will come out this November. .NET 6 will also be an LTS. That's a long-term support release. I do want to talk about this a little bit. There's confusion in the marketplace because .NET 5 is not an LTS release. It has less support. We support .NET 5 exactly the same way we support .NET Core 3.1 and .NET, and we will .NET 6. We patch .NET 5 every month. All .NETs get exactly the same patch levels. All the .NET 5 means is it means that it will only get support through February of next year, and then you would have to move to .NET 6. But we recommend our customers stay on our latest versions. They have all the features, they have all the support, and we're shipping them every year, and it's very predictable. And just to highlight, .NET 5 is available now. Go grab it. The new VSs bring it automatically, including VS for Mac. So it's out there. Try it today. Thanks for letting me come out and chat with you folks today. Best way to get me, outside of these kind of events is to find me on Twitter at @coolcsh, and I'm happy to spend a few minutes answering any questions in chat if there's any questions in chat. So let me quit sharing my screen here, and I can answer a couple questions on chat.
So Scott, I was gathering in Notepad, a bunch of the questions. So I'm going to do a dump right here in chat.
Go for it.
A lot of the questions that seemed there because I didn't want you to have to scroll back, and because there was a lot of chat going on today. So I thought I'd just what were questions basically. I gathered those and I thought I'd put those right in. Of course, we'll probably have more questions come into the chat. Feel free to go ahead and do that. But yeah, feel free to check out what I just posted there and address
accordingly. So the question was, do these numbers come from Optin Analytics? I'm going to assume those are the .NET right. Numbers. So the .NET numbers, when it comes to how many people are running .NET Core or how many people are running .NET all up, those primarily come from the IDE. And the IDE lets us know how many developers are opening .NET projects. So we're undercounting, meaning we don't know how many people are actually running .NET Core or .NET 5 in production because there is no telemetry in the framework. And so if you're actually just running .NET on a project, we don't know. We only know if you're using Visual Studio for Windows, Visual Studio for Mac, or Visual Studio Code. In that case, we do get some telemetry knowing which how many people are opening projects. We don't know what's in the projects, obviously. And so we are definitely undercounting. And so when you see a number like 5 million, that is a low number, but it's impressive anyways to us. It's also why it's hard to compare us to like Node or other languages, because there is no way to really know how many Node developers there are in the world, because there's no way to count them. So that's how where the numbers come from. Is the new deploy essentially just make bundle brought over for core? If you're talking about the demo I was showing where I was using GitHub Actions, GitHub Actions is just the CI/CD tech inside of GitHub, and it just is .NET aware. It's not make bundle. It is actually using the .NET CLI, and all it's doing is basically running the .NET CLI in the cloud. Will future builds of VS be migrated to .NET 5, 6, 7? And so I guess that question is, are we going to build a new version of Visual Studio on top of the newer .NETs? I can't answer that today. But what I will tell you is we are definitely looking at that. One of the goals for us would honestly be to get VS for Windows and VS for Mac both onto like .NET 6. And then it makes it much easier for us to actually add features to one of the IDEs and making it add to both the IDEs because they're on the same code base. How does the no Mac tech required for iOS Xamarin work? Okay, so the way that tech works, if you want to take a Windows machine and you want to plug an iDevice into it, what actually happens when you do that? It's pretty nifty what we do. It does require iTunes to be on the machine, so you have to put iTunes on the machine, and you have to have a free Apple developer account to do this. You hook all the free bits up, and once you do that, what we actually do is we don't really deploy your application. We deploy a stub to the iDevice, and it actually makes development super fast. And so what then happens is the app will run locally on your machine. We push an interpreter onto the iPhone, and when you make a change in Visual Studio, we basically will just send the code changes, only the code changes, to the device. This is pretty cool as well, because it means when you make a change in VS, we don't copy 10 or 15 megs. We just copy the code delta over it, which means the inner loop is really, really good. But we basically use your developer account, which lets you put code on the device, to put the stub on the device, and we run it on your device. If you actually want to publish the app to the store, the iOS store, you do have to have a Mac somewhere in your tool chain. Not for you, but whoever is the one pushing the publish. So you can do develop on your iDevice, you can do debugging on your iDevice. It doesn't require root access or anything like that. But to get to the store, you have to go and have a real Mac somewhere. But and in the future, we hope to have Macs in the cloud, so you can do all that, from the cloud. All ASP.NET projects or ASP.NET Core projects? I don't know. I think that question was probably about the swashbuckles tech, the Open API stuff. The Open API stuff is only added into the Web API projects. We don't for ASP.NET Core. It is not in the .NET Framework ones. We might put it in the .NET Framework in the future, that if people ask. Does this work for API projects too? I'm not sure what that does. So it publishes your API to an app service, and endpoints are generated exposed in Azure API Management. Yes. So this was me publishing the API and being able to publish to API Management. What we do is API Management does require the Open API definition file. And so what we do is we publish your API to Azure App Service, and then we save that Open API file, and we send that Open API file to API Management. And that tells API Management what your API looks like. And we give it the URI of the API in Azure App Service. And so once you're done, you'll be able to basically have an Azure API Management endpoint that knows all about all your APIs and knows how to call your APIs in Azure App Service. So it does all those steps for you. We did this because it was hard. It's pretty cool. Once you get your API published into API Management, a whole world of new capabilities also open up to you. If you've ever heard of Power Apps, Power Apps can actually see your API once it's in API Management. So it allows you to build a low code or no code application using Power Apps and easily call your .NET backends. It's another kind of side effect of being inside of Azure API management. Any pointers on how to implement transactions in microservices, where input to one microservice is output of another long-running service? What I was going to say, and any alternative except going via bus service like RabbitMQ. And I was going to say what I typically recommend for any microservice kind of technology, and I'll give you a real-world scenario for this, is a customer came to us just a week or two ago that is doing some crazy vaccination stuff. Imagine that in the world we're in today, and they wanted to scale up some tech they had that could handle around 200,000 requests per day to millions of requests per day. And even in their case, what we recommend, their bottleneck was basically their SQL Server, which is how many updates to a table could they do before the SQL Server just starts slowing down. And even for them, we recommended a message queue kind of architecture, which is like basically put the request to change the SQL Server into a queue. And we have plenty of this tech inside of Azure. You could obviously run RabbitMQ if you want. There's Service Bus, there's Event, there's a ton of these things. But we do recommend using one of those types of things. But in the case of like the SQL app being killed too much, what we said instead is put all of your updates into the queuing system, and then have a job in the queuing system that basically goes and says, I'm going to pull from that, update the database, and now you can scale the application that was tied to 200,000 updates a day to millions per day, by using that kind of mechanism. Is it possible to bring non.NET containers into Tye? Yes, definitely. That is super important. And so Tye will not just be a .NET technology. I showed Redis Cache, which is a Linux container in my demo, but we assume that in today's world, we live in a heterogeneous world where even if you're running a .NET application, maybe it's a .NET Angular application, well, that still requires Node.js in the build pipelines. And so we will make sure that you can run Node and Python and Go and Rust and all those technologies in Tye as well, because you might have a project that's got maybe you've got a Tye front end and a Java back end. We'll support all those things. If the container is available in the repository, can you reach and set it up as a dependency? Yes. So the question was, do I actually have to run the container locally? What if I just want to run a container in the cloud? I think that's what the question's asking. And in the Tye YAML file, I can also reference an existing running service in the cloud if I don't want to run all the things on my machine. So we'll support all those things. Any .NET tools for UI scaffolding that actually work? What I would ask you there is please reach out to me on Twitter and ask me that question, and I will get you a better answer. We do have some tech inside of .NET today, inside of the Visual Studio toolchain today. We have scaffolding for web projects. So if you're building a Razor page application or an MVC application, we will do scaffolding for you there. If you're asking for scaffolding in a WinForms, WPF, or Xamarin project, I don't have that right now. But if you ping me, I'm happy to think about it. Would you please demo Tye preview future features? Not sure exactly what that means. We will have a Tye update for everybody probably after the first preview or two of .NET 6 come out. As we start taking some of the Tye capabilities, and Tye's going to be broken up into a few things. We're going to go and enhance the run multiple project feature in VS. We're going to rewrite it technically using some of the capabilities of Tye. Then we'll take Tye and we'll add that support for the other languages as somebody was asking before. And we'll decouple Tye from any of the cloud tech, meaning that the Tye that we have today is kind of coupled to Kubernetes. And what we'll do is we'll make Tye have a plugin model where there could be a plugin for Kubernetes, there could be a plugin for App Service, there could be a plugin for AWS. And so we'll make Tye more pluggable so it can support different cloud architectures, not just Kubernetes. And so on. So those are some of the preview or things that you'll see coming in Tye as we move forward. Can I, when using these tools, do some of the more advanced things that when we do with Make Bundle, which obviously this is descended from, such as actually doing static linking with native binaries? If you're asking when it comes to our linking tech and our single exe tech, that's an area where you'll see us continue to invest in version to version. The hope that I have in .NET 6 in this space is what I want to do is one of the challenges we have with the linking tech is many of the libraries out there today are not linker friendly. And we want to enhance .NET and add capabilities in the runtime to let you describe to us if the linker friendly of your app. This means, like, for example, ASP.NET Core was not very linker friendly, meaning that it uses dependency injection, which means the linker doesn't smart enough to know that, and so the linker by default would chunk out too much of ASP.NET Core. What we actually ended up doing in .NET 5, which is how the ASP.NET Core single exes got so small, is we went and put attributes on the framework that tells the linker not to do things. We want to expand that tech to the public so they can go attribute their APIs and their libraries. We want to make that stuff where that's actually surfaced up via NuGet, so you know that something's linker friendly. But this will be a journey for us where .NET will just get better over time as we go here. A link to Tye. What's the roadmap for gRPC use in mobile apps? gRPC, for folks that don't know, it does have some limitations. gRPC requires some advanced tech today. It requires full HTTP2 protocol support. This is why some people have ran into struggles getting gRPC to work in things like Azure App Service, which doesn't support, well, it does and doesn't. It doesn't support full HTTP2. We don't have full HTTP2 support in our Xamarin projects either today. That should resolve itself with the .NET 6 wave as we move to the same BCL. It's the mono BCL that has some limitations there. And so we'll have better support for the mobile apps. Today, for both the mobile apps and for Azure App Service, we have a package called gRPC Web, which gives you a good chunk of the gRPC features over an HTTP transport. Sorry, can't speak. And so it's a hack today, but you'll see us get more stuff in there as you go. And then I see Visual Studio is C++. No, Visual Studio is not C++. Visual Studio is primarily a .NET framework application. It does have C++ inside of it. It has every technology we've ever invented in Microsoft inside of it. It's got COM, it's got WCF, it's got WinForms and WPF. Visual Studio is a crazy application that's got more tech inside of it. VS for Windows as 64-bit would be a great start. Keep watching as we announce the next version of Visual Studio. We are definitely looking at the 64-bitness of Visual Studio. We are taking feedback, and we will have an announcement, I think, pretty soon about the next version of Visual Studio. It's been a while. If .NET is downloaded and running in the browser with Blazor, can my code be decompiled and seen? All .NET code anytime can be decompiled and seen. What you can run is you can run an obfuscator, which will make your code unseeable for the most part in this kind of scenario. It'll mangle your code so bad that nobody will ever want to try to untangle it. But yes, .NET on a server, .NET on a client, .NET code is bytecode, and you can always reverse bytecode back into something that looks like regular code. An obfuscator changes the variable names into terrible, long, awful things. It changes the method names into that as well. And so I'd run an obfuscator if you're worried about it. gRPC is built into .NET 5. Yes, it is. Let's see. Any articles and tools for moving C++ CLI projects to .NET 5 in the pipeline? So I don't know. I'm not sure what the question is. I don't know if people know this, but in .NET Core 3.1 and .NET 5, if the question is about do we have C++ managed support in .NET 5, the answer is we do now. We added it in .NET Core 3.1 because WPF requires it, and we made it in .NET Core 3.0. In 3.1, we added better CLI support for it, and we'll continue making that better and better as we move forward. ASP.NET Core was related to Scott was showing a build plus browser refresh feature in VS. He said this works for ASP.NET, all ASP. I'm sorry, I should have said it works for all ASP.NET Core projects. I don't know if we'll get a chance to get that into ASP.NET projects. I would love to do that. I will talk to the team about that. Is there any tools for testing gRPC services like Postman? Yes, there are. There's some amazing tools. I will find the tool that we use inside of Microsoft. There's an amazing tool you can use that you can point to a gRPC. It'll show you all the handshakes, all that stuff. It'll show you failures and all that kind of stuff. I cannot think of it off the top of my head, but I will Google it and put it in the chat. But yes, there are some amazing tools for doing that. Very fiddler-like kind of tools for gRPC. Somebody already answered the obfuscator question for me. Yeah, I was going to say, people are still asking or talking about the question about don't send proprietary code to the browser. In that case, that's also a great reason to run Blazor server. In Blazor server, none of your code goes to the client ever. Your code runs on the server all the time. You get the same kind of model, and you can run a mixed mode where you've got some on the server and some on the client. You can do that as well. So if there's something super proprietary, hide it behind a web API or run Blazor server where that code never leaves your machine. That's a great question. About that Tye YAML, does it have its own format structure, or is it compatible with some of the existing configs like Docker Compose? Or it does have its own structure today. We ask ourselves, Glenn on my team who drives all the Tye development, we ask ourselves, it has its own format today because we were trying to make it independent of Docker Compose and some of the other formats. We might change our mind there and just instead go focus on something like Docker Compose. If you have feedback there, please send me the feedback at @coolcsh. We're still trying to figure that out. And I can see more people answering the business logic questions. WCF had built-in message logging and tracing logging. Are you planning to add something like that to gRPC? Yes, I would definitely expect to see us add more logging and more capabilities into gRPC as we move forward. That is something we definitely care about. It's weird. We built it into WCF. We did not build it into the old ASP.NET Tech, comically enough. On my next meeting, thanks. Thanks, Scott Hunter. I'm now 2/3 of my Microsoft Scots are getting something answered. That's funny. That is funny. Question for NoOp architects.
Yeah, that's specific to nopCommerce.
Yeah, by the way, I did want to say, one of the things I was impressed about, John, on nopCommerce was, wow, you guys have stayed right on track with all the new tech as we've rolled out the tech, whether it was MVC or .NET Core or .NET 5.
Yeah.
I love seeing that the platform being fully up to date with the latest tech. That's amazing. So thanks.
Yeah, it's a really good representation of how to keep up.
Scott, you were coughing a lot earlier. Do you have COVID? I definitely do not have COVID. Just to let you know that my kids work at a nursing home, and they've already been vaccinated, but because of where they work, we all get COVID tested on a regular basis, and so my whole family was COVID tested just last week. So no COVID here, even though I have a slight cough.
So I do have, maybe we could wrap up with this one question. I think that a lot of nopCommerce developers are probably, I wouldn't say concerned about, but maybe it's how the nopCommerce team should move forward. So they're going to be releasing their 4.4 version that'll compile to .NET 5 over the summer. Now that will, you said the support for .NET 5 would be, end of support would be like in February?
Yeah. So
okay.
non-LTS releases leave support 3 months after we ship. That said, people also over freak out about that kind of thing. It doesn't mean that .NET 5 suddenly turns into a black hole and disappears that day.
Yeah.
It just means we're not going to patch it anymore after that moment. Our goal is moving from .NET 5 to .NET 6. Our internal goal is it would take you 10 minutes to do that.
Yeah.
And for people that, I will also give people a week from this Thursday, we have a mini .NET Conf. And I recommend anybody that has .NET Framework projects that wants to move them to .NET 5. We have some cool announcements that we're going to make there. But back to your question, John, we think that for the average developer moving from .NET 5 to .NET 6 is going to be under 10 minutes. That's a goal from us, which means .NET 6 ships in November. It should not take you 3 months. Should be more than enough time to move to .NET 6.
Gotcha. So from the nopCommerce team's perspective, for them to, before they push out, let's say their 4.5 release or their 5.0 release that following summer, would it make sense to push out some kind of a release of taking that coming version this summer and recompiling it to version 6, let's say January timeframe to be safe?
Probably.
For their customers? Okay.
Yeah, I'd recommend that.
I agree.
I was going to recommend, have you ever, I can hook you up with James Newton King. I see a lot of gRPC questions, and James is like the gRPC expert at Microsoft.
Yeah.
He would be.
I'm surprised to see so many questions actually, but yeah, that'd be great.
I'm happy to see it. We think gRPC is exciting tech. We chose to go take a deep dive on gRPC because it was cross-language tech. The big thing for us is we want to make sure that we had, we do know that, people use a variety of different techs today. Nobody just uses, it'd be great if everybody just used, all C#. But we don't think that's realistic to think that way. And so we love the gRPC tech because you can build a server in C# and then call it from Java, or you could have a server in Go and you could call it from .NET. Yeah. And that cross-language interop is pretty cool. And we also like it because, REST is great. But, in many cases, you can be more productive as a developer building contract-based APIs. It can make your app more fragile, meaning you have to, recompile the front end and the back end together, but your productivity goes through the roof. And you can get better perf with it too. And so it's, so I'm not surprised there's so many questions. I think it's amazing tech. But I can hook you up with James Newton King, and he can come and do a whole talk on just gRPC and talk about logging.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Tools and stuff like that.
Well, we are at time, so I don't want to keep you longer than we said we would.
I have to run to a Microsoft meeting now, so.
All right, yeah, I got my meeting. I got my day job too. So, all right. So how about if we end it here, and if people want to reach out to you over Twitter, like you had on your handle. And I absolutely appreciate your time. We had a great turnout for this event, so.
Thanks for having me.
And the recording will be out there in the next day or two.
Cool.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. Take care.